Third consecutive college football playoff appearance for Michigan. They want to do it right, get a win. It's going to be a difficult challenge, of course. Taking on Alabama at the Rose Bowl. It should be quite the spectacle and quite the game. We got Nelson Hubble on the line. Maize and Blue review on Rivals is the place to check out Nelson's work. Nelson, how are we doing today?
Doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate you being here. Want to get revved up on Michigan and Bama. We'll get there in a second. First, National Signing Day is less than a week away.
Definitely not on the decommit side. It feels that way. I feel pretty strongly about everyone that's in the class right now. And I'm not expecting really any late additions. You never know. Sometimes there are those surprises. And before when Kentucky was about to have, almost lost their head coach to A&M. Instead, they get Mike Elko from Duke, right? Gerard Smith, Jacob Smith were two brothers that are committed down to Kentucky. And then the thought was, hey, and it was pretty, strong opinions that, well, if Kentucky's without their guy, those two players, both the Smith brothers almost came up to Michigan anyways. So that's the thought was that, hey, they'll lean that way. But no changes there at Kentucky, no changes at Michigan. It seems like nothing's, movement wise. I'm not expecting any late commits, but who knows?
Nelson, of course, anybody's evaluation of this class or any class starts with the ranking. That's only a small part of the story, though. So in regards to their targets, who they really wanted, positional needs, all of that put into play, are you feeling good about this class?
I think they're filling their spots. I mean, you look at the running back position, the quarterback position. You've got Jordan Marshall coming in. You've got Jaden Davis. He had an up and down Elite 11, and that sort of knocked his ranking a bit. But he had a very good year. And Jordan Marshall, also very, very good year. He didn't have a single game where he had under 100 total yards. Most of those games, I think he only had one that he didn't rush for 100 in this season. And so he was the bell cow over at Archbishop Moeller down in Cincinnati. Jaden Davis down in North Carolina at Providence Day had a really good year. So those two guys are going to move in as Michigan may lose McCarthy. And then, that I'm still very unsure about, to be honest. I think there's a possibility there that he comes back, especially with NIL and depending on the success of the season. And there's a loaded quarterback class this year. He could position himself to be the prize guy next season. So I wait to see on that. Obviously, Quinn Ewers seems to be coming back. So there, are two possible guys if he does return, him and Ewers. But as it relates to the class, they're filling their spots and they're loading up in the trenches. No surprise with that. Would like to see a little bit more cornerback help. That it has been something that they really committed to last year, and so maybe they didn't feel so much of a need to this year. Maybe they'll look to the portal. We'll see. But as you might lose Josh Wallace, who I think is in his last year, might have a COVID year. Coming from Massachusetts now, and then Will Johnson's back. But again, you want to develop that depth there beneath those two guys. But Michigan's shaping up pretty good here. Not a ton of high-level stars. Davis would be considered that. I think Jordan Marshall would be considered that. Number 2 running back in the country, arguably number 1. We could see some movement by season's end for some of the high school action, which is starting to just wrap up, I think, this weekend. But we'll see how that all plays out. I think Michigan feels good about where they're at. I'm looking at it, and, you're obviously going to have some turnover, but they also have the ability, as we saw last year, to add guys through the portal and some really high-level players. And so that's going to be something to watch for more. Haven't heard a ton of whispers on that, but we'll see as the season ends and Michigan gets a little bit more active there, and some of those players from these high-level programs maybe get through their bowl games, bowl prep, and sort of step out. Because some of these guys are going to wait until the end. So we'll see how that plays out. But portal is where I've got more of a focus, honestly, than this recruiting class as it relates to commit or as it relates to impact next season.
All right. So you go to the portal, and that's one of the reasons why these recruiting rankings don't mean what they once did. Of course, certain teams are more successful going to the portal. Michigan, one of those teams. Offensive line, defensive line. You mentioned Josh Wallace, cornerback, third cornerback that was able to come to Michigan through the portal. So refresh my memory on this. Michigan has done little in the portal this particular cycle thus far. Most of those key additions, with Michigan being in the playoff, did those come after spring practice?
Some of them did. Yes, some of them did, and there was some of that early addition. I don't remember. I'm trying to recall who they added earlier on. Someone who I don't think, maybe it was Wallace. It might have been Wallace, but they did add. Yeah, it was a spring practice, that window after spring practice. They were able to bring in some of those guys, bring in a couple of Stanford guys last year. Ladarius Henderson comes over, and so the thing with that is you're waiting a long time, and coaches have been out on the recruiting trail, and they've been trying to solidify this class, this regular recruiting class. We'll see how the portal class shapes up, but Walter Nolan is going to be the guy that I'm looking at right now. I believe right now is the number one player in the portal, defensive tackle out of Texas A&M now, and so he's in the portal. And Michigan had really, really good chances with him and his commitment in the first place. Jump back. I think this was his first year at A&M. So was it last season or 2 years ago at this point? Whenever he committed, I think it was 2 years ago. And so Nolan now, Michigan has that in already, and if anything, their defensive line is a little stacked returning next year. I mean, if you're bringing back Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, and both those guys are only sophomores, and so you're going to bring those guys back. And now if you could add a guy like Nolan, the thought is we have something here on defense that we feel like we can lean on more than we have within that position group in years prior. So now you're able to parlay what you've done this year at defensive line into next season, which has been a strength for the team. So Nolan is the guy to watch for me. If you're a Michigan fan, you should be begging for the school to go after this guy. And I think they are, because Nolan is one of the premier players in the country at defensive tackle, and he will be that next year, I think. Definitely in the portal right now.
8.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks for Walter Nolan, who was one of the top 5 or 10 players in the nation. Not one of the top 5 or 10 defensive linemen, one of the top 5 or 10 players in the nation, who ultimately signed with that Texas A&M class that was so historic, the number 1 rated class in history of rankings in 2022. Got Nelson Hubble here from Maize and Blue Review. So catch his work right there on Rivals. Of course, this is the time to lock in on Michigan football. Even if you're not a Michigan fan, if you want to catch up with all that's going on at the high end of college football playoff appearance, of course, for a 3rd consecutive year against Alabama. Nelson, before we start to grind it down to nuts and bolts, X's and O's, this is a fairly daunting challenge from a historical standpoint, meaning Nick Saban doesn't lose too many of these kind of games. That's just the history of it. I'm trying to think. So last time they lost a postseason game, they lost the national championship game, but that was to Georgia, who was a historically good team. They lost to Trevor Lawrence and Clemson when they went 15-0. These are the kind of games they're losing. Deshaun Watson's Clemson team in 2016. Otherwise, they're completing the deal, winning national championships or finishing their postseason with a bowl win over Michigan, 2019, Kansas State, 2022. Just the postseason record for Nick Saban. He obviously knows how to prepare his team over a 1-month span, and that would be challenging in and of itself. Of course, Jim Harbaugh, that's the one thing that he has yet to show that he's figured out, is the bowl situation, regardless of the magnitude of it, where he's lost them all since that initial Florida win in 2015.
Yep.
So your thoughts about that situation?
Yeah, it's one of those things where that's maybe the final, monkey on Jim Harbaugh's back. If you think about what he has accomplished, hasn't accomplished, I don't put the expectation of a national championship on coaches because it's such a difficult thing to do. So when you're thinking about something that you should be able to do, it's at a school like Michigan, the expectation is you win bowl games, and at least with semi-regularity. Hey, let's maybe get a 50-50 split here, but that's not even been close to what's gone on. And frankly, I haven't been impressed with Michigan for almost any of those bowl appearances except for that Florida game. I mean, they did get blown out against Alabama. It's a much closer game than it seemed. I think the final was something like 28-12 or something like that. I don't remember what it was.
35-16.
Okay, 35-16. There was a right. So, and what happened there? I know there was a late touchdown in that game, and Alabama led most of that second half, but it was Michigan and Alabama right in it. The first half, you felt like, hey, I don't even know why Michigan's in this game. If watching how they played, the roster differences there, and that was a down year for Alabama. Now, when you look at Saban, obviously the success is there, and he has that resume, and he knows how to approach these things. And Harbaugh, this is sort of new territory for him as it relates to the playoff, and he's figuring it out right now. And that's what he's been trying to do the last 2 years. I think last season was a fluke. The Georgia game 2 years ago, no surprises there. That was not a shocker to me at all that they got rolled in the way that they did. But last year felt a little different. It felt like it was just some silly mistakes, maybe a lack of focus, and those 2 pick sixes, are killer. And so Michigan really should have won that game. I think that's been, rehashed enough. But coming into this season, it feels like both these teams are very evenly matched. So when you talk about the coaching battle, that has even more of an impact than it ever has. And now I'm pretty confident that Michigan will be prepared for this game, and Alabama will also look like one of their better selves. And so, especially if you look at the numbers, I mean, what these two teams have done this year, they're very evenly matched. The style of play from both these teams, not too far off. Defensively, Michigan is a much better defense than Alabama, but Alabama's still not. They're starting to shape up on defense late in the season. So we'll see which version of them comes out against Michigan. I'd expect their best. I'd expect the version that we saw against Georgia or something close to it. And so we'll see how Michigan can respond, and if they have the willpower, I guess, on offense and defense to sort of hang in there if they get punched in the mouth, which is what I think Alabama's going to look to do early. So we'll see what happens. Otherwise, it could be a really grinded out game. It could be one of those. Both teams are going to lean on the things that they trust, and that's running the ball. And we're going to see if it goes down late into the fourth quarter, which is what I expect. So that's where I think the quarterback battle has an impact.
In most respects, it's useless to try to compare what happened in 2019 in the Citrus Bowl to 4 years later. Completely different rosters, of course, but they are the same programs. And one correlation I'll make that should make Michigan fans feel better is even though that Alabama team did not make the playoffs, they were probably a better team. They were probably a more talented team. They lost 2 games. This team could have lost 2 games. That team came within a clank off an upright of making the playoffs or losing to Joe Burrow and LSU. Yes, by 5 points. So I'm mixing up. No, I'm not mixing up years. Yeah, coming within 5 points of coming against Joe Burrow and company. So while Michigan is a much, much better team than they were in 2019. So looking at just level of play performance, that gap has been closed. Now, Michigan's offensive line, which has been a strength, wasn't necessarily strength at times down the stretch. A lot of shuffling, injuries, lose one of the best in the land in Zach Zinter, unfortunately, for this game. Again, a place where I would think you and other people were secure. Would there be some concerns there now?
Yeah. So I definitely also, back to what you said a little bit there as well, as the trajectory of these programs is a little different than it was back then too. Michigan feels like Alabama's been pretty steady. Michigan feels like they're on an incline here, and they have been. So that helps. You've built that momentum year after year. But when you talk about the offensive line and you look at what they've done this year, I haven't been nearly as impressed as I expected to be, frankly, going into the year. I thought Michigan would play much better on the line of scrimmage on offense. And they have the talent. And that's maybe the most frustrating thing is they weren't moving people this year and haven't been to the same degree that I think we all expected them to, especially with some of the players that they brought in. Now, the most important position on their offensive line, Drake Nugent at center, I think is very solid, and I don't think that's a concern, which is a good thing. It's been tackle play and in the run game and in pass protection a little bit. Ladarius Henderson seems to have finally got his feet set and settled in. At left tackle, at right side, Carson Barnhart. For much of this season, especially going back to that Penn State game when you're first tested, and even as long back as Rutgers, I wasn't impressed with how he played. And Michigan's, to their credit, stuck with him and tried to get that solidified up front. And part of the problem there is in camp and fall camp, you're just rotating guys through all the time. That whole offensive line on the outside, both your right tackle, left tackle, and your center, you're just rotating different guys. I mean, you had such a battle there. And with so many talented players, they didn't play together as long as they needed to. And then you get in season, and so you're hoping to make those adjustments, make those improvements, and they did look a little better as the season went on. And then you hit Penn State, and your offensive line can't pass block. So definitely a concern. Alabama's defense is nowhere near as frightening as it has been in years past, which bodes well for Michigan. But their defense is still fine. They're decent, but much better defense than a lot of the Big Ten has put forward. And so, it is a concern. I think what's going to happen here is we're going to see where these teams made their biggest strides given the 3 weeks or so that they have, 3 or 4 weeks from championship Sunday or championship Saturday, excuse me, all the way up to the Monday night that they're going to play. I believe it's Monday at 5:30 or 5. I think the game is. So we're going to wait and see. I wonder if there's going to be any shuffling because fall camp, plenty of movement, right? Then you get to the break here, and younger guys sometimes push for spots, or some people who maybe been on the bench all season long. Usually happens in skill positions more than on the line of scrimmage, but it's possible. So hey, maybe someone like Miles Hinton does steal that right tackle job, especially when you move Barnhart to guard and Jones, stays at right tackle. Maybe someone else moves in at guard. I'm curious to see how things change. I don't expect it will, but that possibility is also on the table.
So while these teams appear to be evenly matched, Vegas believes that they're evenly matched with the last I checked, a 1.5 point spread.
Mm-hmm.
Is there either an optimistic area that you are looking and hoping that Michigan takes advantage of, or a huge area of concern where you think that as you get more comfortable and acquainted with Alabama personnel, that you think either Michigan can take advantage of this, they're far better here, or I hope Alabama doesn't see this, take advantage of that?
Well, let's start with the optimistic approach for sure. Quarterback position, I know statistically Milroe and JJ McCarthy are pretty similar, but Michigan has the advantage there to me very clearly. Their play style hasn't forced them to pass as much, and McCarthy has been banged up since he played Penn State, and he has had an ankle injury, and so he's been dealing with that, and he seemed to be a little bit healthier against Ohio State. But then, last week against Iowa, I wasn't so sure. And so the more I watch him and when he's healthy versus when he's not healthy, which has been something that Michigan keeps under wraps pretty well. And it's sort of like a rumor, sort of a whisper, like he's got this injury, but he's going to play. And he always just says, I'm feeling great, whatever, going into the week, as any player should, if you're not trying to give your opponent any sort of advantage as to your ability to run the ball as a quarterback, because that's something that we just haven't seen from him. And so McCarthy has not been much of a runner this year, and that is a component that Michigan has not put on tape very much that I think they're going to break out here in this playoff. And I think that is the thing that they've been sort of sandbagging and holding on to all season long because they haven't needed it. And against Ohio State, you saw Alex Orji come in and run the ball, which implied to me, number one, what kind of confidence they have in Orji, but also that JJ's not in any shape to be needing to run him. And so Orji gives that threat. The thing is, it's an obvious run when he's in. So would he get more touches against Alabama just to bring in a different component to this offense? I think it's entirely possible. And I also think that if he has the opportunity to throw the ball, it's going to be play action, deep shot, something like that. But Orji has a cannon, so he can throw the ball. It's the accuracy that's the problem. Very much like Joe Milton was when he came into Michigan. Milton, pretty good runner, thrower, not very accurate at all. Orji seems to have, he's a little bit better of a runner than Milton. His touch in the passing game, we just haven't seen. So I'm not sure what to expect there, but I think the quarterback position is a difference for Michigan. Now, Milroe has been playing better and better as the season's gone on, but I just think having McCarthy been here before, seen it as a guy sitting on the bench and as a guy in the games. He's made the mistakes, right? He very clearly made the mistakes against TCU. He threw those pick sixes. So now he has the chance to lean on that experience and also to capitalize on an opportunity that he's had in front of him before, whereas Milroe is going to show up to something that he's never dealt with in his life. And let's not pretend that the playoff is any different game because it's just like any other game. Coaches will say it, coach speak. There's some coaches I've heard a phrase that they say is, go 1 for 1, right? That's a very common phrase. We're just going to go 1-1 this week. We're just going to focus on this game. And that's not what really happens behind the scenes. They do look ahead. So my point is, this is a whole spectacle, and the spectacle of the playoff does impact people, does impact mindsets, does impact a player when he steps onto the field for the first time in the Rose Bowl. A player from Alabama at Alabama, but Milroe, who, Alabama's never played in the Rose Bowl, and have they even played in the Rose Bowl? I'm not sure. It's been a very long time, if at all, right? So, right, it's the first time because it's always ACC and Pac-12, I believe, before that, and or whoever the Big Ten had their contract with the Rose Bowl. So, this is an entirely new environment for him, and I think that does give Michigan an advantage on maybe the mental side of things. And I think McCarthy is a far more polished passer than Milroe is, but he's gotten better this year.
Nelson Hubble, Maize and Blue Review, breaking down Michigan football on a daily basis. He and the rest of the crew there on the Rivals platform from Michigan Athletics. Nelson, appreciate you being here. If we don't see you in the meantime, Merry Christmas, and I hope you enjoy your holiday.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mark.